On this Sunday night, Russian airstrikes on NATO's doorstep. Dozens are killed after missiles strike a military training base once used by Canadian soldiers not far from the Polish border.
If Russia attacks, fires upon, takes a shot at NATO territory, the NATO alliance would respond to that.
Growing fears over a global conflict and advice for parents on how to talk about the war.
Give them the information that they want to see.
Hard to hear what research reveals about how COVID-19 infects our ears. Plus, honoring a century-old sacrifice, paying tribute to Canada's so-called Black Battalion.
Global National. Reporting tonight, Jeff Semple.
I'll take a look. These new pictures reveal what's left of a military base in western Ukraine after Russia fired more than 30 missiles, killing dozens and raising fears about the war spilling beyond Ukraine's borders. Good evening and thank you for joining us. The war in Ukraine is now at NATO's doorstep. Those Russian airstrikes hit just a short drive from the border with Poland, a NATO country, and not far from the Ukrainian city of Lviv. That's where we find our Mike Armstrong tonight. Mike.
Well, Jeff, the attack happened almost at first light, about 6:30 a.m. here, local time. Driving to the base this morning, we passed literally dozens and dozens of ambulances. Smoke was visible from several kilometers away. We were able to reach the base, but were told not to take images. The soldiers at the site were understandably on edge. There are videos and stills on social media that show just how destructive this attack was. Now, there were so many injured, they were taken to hospitals all across the region. At one facility, a medical worker told us one of the locations hit was a kitchen, and that some of the people killed and injured were preparing food. According to local officials, 30 missiles were fired from planes that took off from a base in Russia about 1,500 kilometers away. Air defenses would have shot some down, but 8 made it through. Now, the base was the headquarters for Canada's training operation in this country. Op Unifier ran programs for Ukrainian soldiers in other regions as well, but the Yavoriv base was its hub. Prime Minister Trudeau visited in July of 2016. Canada pulled its troops out of Ukraine this past February, just prior to the Russian invasion. In recent weeks, the base has been used for training and staging. A tweet last week from one of the president's advisors and a lead negotiator promoted the base, describing it as having overcrowded training areas. There were foreign fighters who went through the facility as well. One of them told us yesterday he expected the base to be a target. Less than 24 hours later, it was hit. A Russian military spokesman made it clear those foreign fighters were one of the reasons the base was targeted. He claims a large number were killed and foreign weapons destroyed. Now, the base is very close to the Polish border, just 20 kilometers. That location is making some nervous. A stray missile is something NATO has considered. A special line of communication has been set up between Washington and Moscow to prevent an escalation over an accident.
We can talk to the Russian Ministry of Defense. That system is working, that line is working, and we will absolutely not hesitate to use it if we need to.
This Ukrainian soldier says the missiles could have landed on the other side of the border and calls on Europe to get involved immediately. Now, I spoke to a couple of Canadian soldiers who were part of the training mission and who in recent years spent time at that base. They know it, they know people who work there. This was a tough day. Jeff?
And another anxious night. Mike Armstrong in Lviv, Ukraine. Thanks, Mike. And several other areas of Ukraine were also hit by renewed Russian shelling. At least one person was killed in an airstrike that destroyed this residential block in the northern city of Chernihiv. Firefighters rescued several people from the burning building. Ukraine's emergency service also shared this video showing an unexploded bomb being removed from an apartment building. Much of the city has been heavily damaged by airstrikes. And American journalist and award-winning filmmaker Brent Renaud was killed in an attack just outside of the Ukrainian capital. His colleague was also hurt and is now being treated in hospital. He says they were shot by Russian forces.
We crossed the first bridge in Irpin. We're going to film other refugees leaving, and we got into a car. Somebody offered to take us to the other bridge, and we crossed a checkpoint, and they start shooting at us. So the driver turned around, and they kept shooting.
The head of the Kyiv Region Police posted these photos on Facebook, confirming the 50-year-old journalist had died. Renault was wearing a New York Times press badge, but he was not on assignment for the paper at the time. And bowing to pressure, the United States now says it will supply Ukrainian fighters with more weapons and security assistance. But despite calls to take more drastic measures, such as a no-fly zone, the Biden administration, it says it will not support any actions that risk direct conflict with Russia. Jennifer Johnson has those details from Washington.
Hours after waves of Russian missiles pounded a military training base on Ukraine's border with Poland, the U.S. struck back, pledging more weapons to help Ukrainian fighters defend their country.
We are determined, and the Ukrainians are determined, to ensure that anti-tank, anti-armor, anti-air capabilities, ammunition, and other forms of assistance actually do make it to the front to blunt the Russian advance.
Ukraine is pleading with the U.S. and its allies almost hourly for more military power.
What we are asking is a very simple thing. We say, arm Ukraine and we will do the rest. Give us all the weapons necessary and we will fight for our own land and for our people.
The Russian attack followed threats by the Kremlin to target foreign weapons shipments in Poland headed to Ukraine. The White House still says it will not put U.S. soldiers on the ground or military jets in the sky above, fearing a broader war with nuclear-armed Russia. Ukrainian officials already fear Vladimir Putin could resort to using nuclear weapons.
Putin, he can use nuclear weapon because if he bombed and killed Russian troops on peaceful cities, children, women, they bombed children hospitals, so they can do everything.
A new CBS News poll shows 73% of Americans support a military response, only if Russia attacks a NATO country. But Ukrainian Americans fear there will be nothing left of Ukraine if the U.S. and its allies don't do more.
The entire world is with Ukraine, and we're fighting for democracy.
There are now over 9,000 U.S. soldiers in Poland, there only to defend the NATO country, as Russian military strikes get closer and closer. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has just returned home after spending a week in Europe, discussing next steps to support Ukraine and push back against Russia. But what did that trip actually accomplish? Our Abigail Bimman on the Canadian contribution.
Talking Ukraine with about a dozen world leaders, Justin Trudeau stopped in 4 countries in 4 days.
It's been about solidarity and alignment amongst leaders across Europe and indeed around the world. But more than that, it's about concrete support.
That includes $117 million to help more Ukrainians reach Canada, new sanctions, and an extension of Canada's NATO mission in Latvia. But according to government sources speaking before the trip, the goal was also to push ideas forward and launch new ones with maximum impact to stop Russia, though there was no public evidence of that.
Are there new ideas being discussed behind the scenes that you just can't share?
Yes, there are. We need to work on them with our partners because that's how we can be most effective.
A senior government source pointed to time with the new German chancellor as especially key. Trudeau and Olaf Scholz spent an unscheduled 3 hours together Wednesday night.
The Germans really wanted to talk to us.
Canada's former ambassador to Germany, Peter Beam, says a lot happens behind closed doors and being face-to-face makes a big difference.
You cannot do everything on a platform that is virtual. You can't go into the corner with your fellow leader, whether it's Boris Johnson or Mark Rutte, and say, look, can we start thinking about long-term aid and humanitarian flows? What about a global food crisis, considering that Ukraine is the 7th largest grain exporter?
Simply having the personal relationships with leaders allows you to then react that much more quickly when the next crisis point comes, as opposed to, yeah, we Zoomed once in 2020, and so now we're going to do life and death decisions together.
This former Canadian ambassador to Ukraine says most NATO leaders are in a dilemma about what to do next.
This trip didn't solve that dilemma. because it's a very difficult one.
While the opposition calls for more action.
Canada needs to have some more concrete examples of what we can do. We need to make sure that we are prioritizing defense spending.
New Democrats want more aid and easier immigration pathways.
It's important he's there, he's at those tables, that he's participating. Should they and could they have done more and can do more? 100%.
Pushing back against Russia while no one can predict Vladimir Putin's next move. Abigail Bimman, Global News, Ottawa.
With so much horror and devastation, the war can be a difficult topic to address with children. But experts say there are ways to help our kids understand and to cope. Sarah Ryan explains.
For the Solomons, the war in Ukraine hits close to home. They did missionary work there for 5 years. Their youngest child lived there longer than here.
She wakes up every morning and she goes, "Are our friends still alive?" And I never thought I'd have to deal with that as a parent.
Although a bit older, their sons have concerns too.
Our 12-year-old, he has big questions. He wants to know why humanity is kind of acting this way. What is the purpose of it?
Registered psychologist Dr. Brent McDonald says war is a challenging thing for anyone, let alone children, to understand.
What I really encourage parents to do is first of all, check in with your kids to see what they do know and what their understanding of what's happening is, because there's probably going to be a lot of misconceptions.
He says kids need to feel safe. He suggests using a map to show where Russia, Ukraine, and Canada are in relation to one another. But pretending this war isn't happening is counterproductive.
Ignoring what's happening around us is, I would argue, in pretty much any situation, not effective, particularly for kids, because that becomes a habit.
Children are still hearing about what's going on, be it online or in school.
Certainly this is being talked about in our classrooms, and it's being talked about in a way that is respectful, certainly, and is keeping in mind that this could be trauma-inducing for some of our students.
McDonald encourages focusing on positives like humanitarian efforts.
It doesn't mean we have to be into the gory details of everything, but we can give them the information that they want to see, that they want to hear at their level.
The Solomons are just trying to do their best.
Talking with them, it's been very difficult. We try to be realistic, but we also try to help them to understand what is going on.
Sarah Ryan, Global News.
Still ahead, medical mystery investigating a lingering symptom of COVID-19. For the first time in months, the Montreal Canadiens played in front of a full house last night after more COVID-19 restrictions were lifted in Quebec. Attendance was nearly 21,000 at the Bell Centre as the Habs fell to the Seattle Kraken 4-3. Fans also no longer need to show proof of vaccination to attend the games. 2 years into the pandemic, and scientists are still unraveling COVID-19 mysteries, and one of them is a hearing issue. Tinnitus, a constant ringing in the ears, has been reported by thousands of COVID-19 patients. And as Jamie Maracher reports, experts are closer to understanding the link between the virus and that aggravating auditory ailment.
Teresa Huff rang in 2022 with what she calls a mild case of COVID. But it's the symptoms she thinks the virus left behind that has her searching for a solution.
I noticed it probably the first week in February, but it may have even been before that, just at night, the ringing in my ears.
That's just one example of tinnitus, a constant buzz, whoosh, or ringing in the ears. 37% of Canadians have to endure the annoying and uncomfortable condition, which is believed to be an inflammatory response or a result of stress. And in March of 2021, a group of researchers found tinnitus was reported by 15% of COVID patients. Audiologist Rex Banks says pandemic anxiety and isolation may be to blame.
During the pandemic, people who are spending more time alone, for example, they may be spending more time in silence, meaning that they may become more aware of their tinnitus.
But there is another possible explanation. For the last year, researchers have studied the inner ear cells of both humans and mice and found COVID-19 does have the ability to infect some of the cells, which can underlie problems with hearing or balance.
The vaccine or COVID is sort of triggering this inner inner hair cells to exacerbate their existing tinnitus, just like it's affecting smell or taste.
Thousands of incidents of vaccine-related tinnitus have been reported around the world, including 6 cases in Johnson & Johnson's own COVID shot trial. Still, it's a rare ramification, and experts agree the benefits of the vaccine far outweigh the risk. Matt Willis is boosted, but it was after his bout with COVID in November, he says he too noticed the high-pitched sound of tinnitus had become more intense.
I have to find ways to try and concentrate, and that I'm not fixating on the sound the whole time.
Drowning out the noise and learning to live with a condition with no cure. Jamie Morocker, Global News, Toronto.
Still ahead, California's new plan to keep edible food out of landfills. Welcome back. A stark reminder tonight of Canada's environmental impact. This is Earth Overshoot Day, the annual occasion marked in Canada, the United Arab Emirates, and the United States. It's the day humanity has consumed more natural resources than the planet can replenish in a given year. It means that just 2.5 months into 2022, we've already overshot Earth's ability to replenish natural resources. Composting and food waste recycling programs are commonplace here in Canada. Diverting organic waste from landfills helps to reduce methane emissions that contribute to climate change. But in the United States, those composting programs are more limited. California is now hoping to change that by recovering edible food before it gets tossed in the trash. Rob Malcolm explains.
For the first time, mandatory food recycling has begun in California, and Joy Kleinberg, a mother of 5 in the city of Davis, is already ahead of the game.
We've been doing this for at least 5+ years.
California is now the first state in the country to mandate food waste reduction for businesses and residents alike.
SB 1383 is the biggest change to our trash since we started recycling in the 1980s.
The move was made in an effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from landfills.
What happens when waste goes to a landfill, organic waste, it actually breaks down into methane, which is a potent greenhouse gas.
2/3 of all waste in California is organic, and the state sees some 5.5 million tons of food waste end up in landfills each year. This new initiative aims to dramatically reduce that.
So when we reach our 75% goal of diverting organic waste from landfills, it is the equivalent of taking more than 1 million cars off the road for over a year.
Since landfills remain one of the largest sources of methane gas production, one of the main goals of the new law is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by the year 2030. And composting isn't the only factor the state sees as success. A unique component of the law is a requirement by businesses to recover 20% of the edible food waste that might otherwise go into a landfill or a compost bin.
From restaurants, from retailers such as grocery stores, anytime that they have food that they may have thrown out before, we want to first do a look at it and see if we can recover some of that food for edible consumption.
But after a little more than a month adjusting to the new laws, some food vendors are still trying to find their footing.
We have many issues through COVID shutting down. That seems to be probably one of the least concerning things that I have on my plate. But if they can provide it and they can teach us how to do it, great.
The California Department of Resources and Recycling's director says they know it will take some time for the program to become part of everyday life, but they are working on making it as seamless as possible.
Across the state, we are giving grants to local governments from everything from the startup of the collection program to these educational campaigns.
Joy has already seen the benefits of composting and is proud that her state has now made it law to do what she's been doing for years.
I can definitely say this is the one thing that makes me very happy to be from California about.
Rob Malcolm, Global News, Sacramento.
Up next, remembering the legacy and sacrifices of Canada's Black Battalion. The Russian invasion of Ukraine offers a grim reminder of how wars can devastate families, communities, and entire countries. But in Canada, there's a new effort underway to recognize sacrifices from more than a century ago, contributions that have been largely overlooked until now. Ross Lord has that story.
Despite a topic steeped in racial prejudice, Jerome Downey points with pride.
This is the late Private George Alexander Downey. He's from Halifax.
His great-grandfather, a veteran of both World Wars and a member of a remarkable First World War unit, the No. 2 Construction Battalion, men who were prevented from fighting in the war because they were black. They persevered, forming what became known as the Black Battalion, building rail lines, trenches, and bridges for the soldiers they were prohibited from fighting alongside, and creating a path of opportunity for their descendants like Army Reservist Downey.
To be a graduate of university, to be a tradesman, to be a business owner, to have the opportunities that I have because of the sacrifices of members of No. 2 Construction Battalion, it means a lot.
A connection reinforced by his recent visit to the Jura region of France, where the No. 2 Battalion's efforts are memorialized at a Commonwealth gravesite. Soldiers who were overlooked in Canada for more than a century. But this summer, the federal government will issue an apology for the racism that kept battalion members from being full partners in the war effort. With growing awareness, there are new discoveries.
That we just received in our collection.
This violin, donated to Nova Scotia's Black Cultural Centre, was handcrafted by a soldier who'd been part of the battalion's musical band.
There's so much history that's hidden, and I think this is a great opportunity to bring that to the forefront to ensure that the legacy of the No. 2 continues on.
A legacy of determination and sacrifice, qualities everyone can admire.
This isn't a Black Canadian story. This is a Canadian story. This is our history that everyone can gravitate to and hold to proud.
Ross Lord, Global News, Dartmouth, Nova Scotia.
And that is Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Jeff Semple. Tonight, we leave you with some inspiring moments and passion from Canadian athletes at the Paralympic Games in Beijing, which just wrapped up today. Team Canada put on its second-best showing ever at a Paralympic Winter Games, winning 25 medals, 8 gold, 6 silver, and 11 bronze, an impressive haul. Congratulations to Team Canada, and thank you for watching. Have a great night.